Before we start, hit that subscribe to support the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Jake Morrison, and for 12 years I carried the Trident, serving as a United States Navy SEAL with Team 6. I've conducted operations in places that don't exist on any map, eliminated targets that were never supposed to be breathing, and witnessed things that would make your worst nightmares seem like bedtime stories. But nothing, absolutely nothing prepared me for what we discovered deep in the Venezuelan jungle in 2019 during Operation Silent Thunder. I'm sitting here in my cabin in Montana, 3 years removed from active duty, battling PTSD that keeps me awake most nights, knowing that what I'm about to tell you could cost me everything. My pension, my freedom, maybe even my life. But after watching the news cycle spin lies about what's really happening in South America, after seeing politicians make decisions based on fabricated intelligence reports, I can't stay silent anymore. The American people deserve to know the truth about what their government discovered in that jungle and why every major power on Earth is now scrambling to control what we found. You need to understand something right up front. I'm not some conspiracy theorist looking for attention. I spent over a decade in the most elite special operations unit on the planet. I've been shot at in 14 different countries, survived 3 helicopter crashes, and lost more brothers than I care to count. My service record speaks for itself, and the medals gathering dust in my closet aren't participation trophies. When I tell you something happened, it happened exactly as I describe it. The mission briefing came down through channels that most people in the military never even know exist. We were told to report to a nondescript building in Virginia where men in expensive suits who never gave their real names explained that we'd be conducting a search and recovery operation in Venezuelan territory. Officially, we were never there. Unofficially, we were hunting for something that had crashed in the jungle 3 weeks earlier, something that belonged to us but had gone dark during a classified research flight. What struck me immediately was the level of security surrounding this briefing. I'd been involved in operations targeting high-value terrorist leaders, and I'd never seen anything like this. Everyone in that room had clearances above top secret, and we were all required to sign documents that made it crystal clear that discussing this mission with anyone, including our families, would result in immediate termination and federal prosecution. The legal language was so specific and so threatening that even hardened operators like us felt the weight of what we were getting into. The team consisted of 8 SEALs, all veterans of multiple combat deployments. There was Rodriguez, our communications specialist who could hack into enemy networks while under fire. Thompson, our medic who'd kept more dying soldiers alive than any man should have to. Williams, our explosives expert who could turn a paperclip and some household chemicals into something that would level a building. And Stevens, our sniper who could put a bullet through a dime at 800 yards in a crosswind. We were told the crashed object was an experimental aircraft conducting atmospheric research over the Amazon basin. The official story was that mechanical failure had forced an emergency landing in hostile territory, and our job was to secure the wreckage and extract any recoverable technology before enemy forces could analyze it. Standard search and recovery. The kind of mission we'd run dozens of times in Iraq and Afghanistan. But there were details that didn't add up from the beginning. The timeline was wrong for a mechanical failure. According to the flight data they showed us, the aircraft had been operating normally until it simply vanished from radar in a matter of seconds. No distress signal, no emergency beacon, no communication with ground control. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. As if something had reached up from the jungle and pulled it out of the sky. The insertion was planned for a remote area of the Venezuelan Amazon, approximately 200 miles southeast of Caracas, in territory controlled by drug cartels and paramilitary groups hostile to American interests. We'd be going in completely black, no support, no backup, no extraction plan beyond a predetermined pickup point 72 hours after insertion. If we missed that window, we were on our own in a country where being captured meant torture and execution. The night before deployment, I couldn't sleep. Something about this mission felt different, wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. I'd learned to trust my instincts over 12 years of combat operations, and those instincts were screaming that we were walking into something far more dangerous than a simple recovery mission. But orders are orders, and SEALs don't get to pick and choose which operations they execute based on gut feelings. We inserted via halo jump at 0 dark 30, dropping from 30,000 feet into complete darkness over jungle so dense that satellite imagery couldn't penetrate the canopy. The jump was flawless, textbook execution that put our 8-man team on the ground within 50 meters of our planned landing zone. But from the moment we touched down, everything about the environment felt hostile, in ways that went beyond the obvious dangers of enemy territory. The jungle was too quiet. In my experience operating in tropical environments, the night should have been alive with sounds, insects, birds, small mammals moving through the underbrush. Instead, we found ourselves surrounded by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of our own breathing. Rodriguez tried to establish communication with our command center and found nothing but static across all frequencies, as if something was jamming our signals. We moved through the darkness using night vision equipment and GPS coordinates, following a bearing that should have led us to the crash site within 6 hours of hard movement through difficult terrain. The jungle was unlike anything I'd experienced in training or combat. The vegetation was wrong, somehow. Plants that looked normal during the day revealed bizarre characteristics under infrared imaging. Leaves that absorbed heat instead of reflecting it, creating cold spots that showed up as dark voids on our thermal scopes. Thompson was the first to notice the anomalies in his equipment. His medical sensors, designed to monitor the team's vital signs and environmental exposure, began registering readings that shouldn't have been possible. Radiation levels fluctuating wildly, electromagnetic signatures that corresponded to no known natural phenomena, atmospheric pressure variations that defied meteorological explanation. By dawn, we'd covered 12 kilometers through terrain that should have taken us directly to the coordinates provided during our briefing. But instead of finding wreckage, we discovered something that made us question everything we thought we knew about the mission. The crash site wasn't just a downed aircraft. It was a clearing in the jungle that looked like it had been carved out by forces beyond anything in our military arsenal. The trees weren't burned or broken. They were gone, as if something had simply erased them from existence, leaving behind a perfectly circular area of bare earth approximately 200 meters in diameter. The soil itself showed characteristics that our field analysis equipment couldn't identify. It wasn't charred or melted, but it had a crystalline structure that suggested exposure to temperatures and pressures that should have vaporized organic matter completely. And in the center of that impossible clearing, we found the source of every anomaly we'd detected during our approach. It wasn't an experimental aircraft that had crashed in the Venezuelan jungle. It was something else entirely. Something that would force us to confront the possibility that everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe was fundamentally wrong. What we found in that clearing defied every law of physics I learned in my engineering courses at the Naval Academy. The object was roughly 30 meters long and 15 meters wide, but its shape seemed to shift depending on the angle from which you viewed it. From one side, it appeared cylindrical, like a conventional aircraft fuselage. From another angle, it looked triangular, almost crystalline. Move 10 feet to the left, and suddenly it resembled something organic, like the exoskeleton of some massive insect. The surface material was unlike anything in our database of known alloys and composites. It absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating a visual effect that made your eyes struggle to focus. When Williams touched it with his gloved hand, the material responded, rippling outward from the point of contact like liquid mercury, but maintaining its solid structure. The temperature readings were impossible. Our thermal imaging showed the object as simultaneously the coldest and hottest thing in the immediate area. Rodriguez tried every piece of electronic equipment in our kit, and everything malfunctioned within 10 meters of the craft. Radio communications degraded to static. GPS units spun wildly before shutting down completely. Even our watches stopped working, their digital displays flickering between random numbers and symbols that didn't correspond to any known character set. But it was Stevens who made the discovery that changed everything. While the rest of us were trying to make sense of the craft's exterior, he'd been scanning the perimeter of the clearing through his rifle scope. He called us over to his position and pointed toward the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then he handed me his scope, and I understood why his voice was shaking. There were others, dozens of them, humanoid figures standing motionless among the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that were almost human but subtly wrong. Their limbs were too long, their heads slightly too large, and they moved with a fluid grace that suggested they weren't bound by the same physical limitations as human beings. They'd been watching us. For how long, we had no idea, but they'd positioned themselves in a perfect circle around the clearing, maintaining what appeared to be a respectful distance from the crashed object. When I looked through the scope, one of them turned its head and looked directly at me. The eye contact lasted only a second, but I felt something I'd never experienced in 12 years of combat operations. Complete and overwhelming certainty that I was in the presence of intelligence far superior to anything human. Thompson was hyperventilating, his medical training warring with what his eyes were telling him. These weren't human beings, but they weren't animals either. They stood upright, wore what appeared to be clothing or equipment, and demonstrated coordinated behavior that suggested complex communication and social organization. When one moved, the others adjusted their positions accordingly, maintaining their perimeter around the clearing. Williams wanted to approach them, but Rodriguez grabbed his arm and pointed to his communication equipment. The static had cleared, and we were receiving a signal. Not from our command center, but from somewhere else entirely. The transmission wasn't in any language we recognized, but there was an unmistakable pattern to it, a mathematical precision that suggested it was directed specifically at us. I made the decision to establish a defensive perimeter around the craft while we tried to figure out our next move. But as soon as we began moving into tactical positions, the figures in the trees responded. They didn't advance or retreat, but they shifted their positions in ways that mirrored our movements, as if they understood our military protocols and were adapting their own formations accordingly. That's when the craft began to change. The rippling effect that had started when Williams touched it spread across the entire surface, and sections of what we'd assumed was solid hull began to fold back on themselves, revealing an interior that defied spatial logic. The opening was maybe 3 meters wide, but when you looked inside, the space appeared vast, extending far beyond what the exterior dimensions should have allowed. Light emanated from within, not the harsh white of artificial illumination, but something softer, more organic. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and each pulse seemed to resonate with something deep in our chests. Rodriguez's equipment was going crazy, registering energy signatures that shouldn't exist and electromagnetic patterns that corresponded to no known technology. Stevens lowered his rifle and took a step toward the opening. I ordered him to hold position, but he didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on something inside the craft, and his expression had changed from professional alertness to something approaching wonder. Thompson moved to intercept him, but stopped when he saw what Stevens was looking at. Inside the craft, floating approximately 3 feet above what appeared to be a floor surface, was a sphere of pure energy. It rotated slowly, casting patterns of light that seemed to contain information, like a 3-dimensional display showing data we couldn't interpret. But more disturbing than the sphere itself was what surrounded it. The interior walls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed, as if they existed in more dimensions than human vision could process. Williams was the first to voice what we were all thinking. This wasn't a crashed experimental aircraft. This was something else entirely, something that had come from somewhere far beyond the reach of human technology. And the figures watching us from the tree line weren't enemy combatants or local inhabitants. They were the crew, or perhaps the rescue team, waiting patiently for us to understand that we'd stumbled into something far beyond our comprehension. The realization hit us like a physical blow. We weren't conducting a search and recovery mission. We were witnesses to first contact with non-human intelligence, and our government had known exactly what they were sending us to find. The experimental aircraft story was a cover, designed to get a small team of highly trained soldiers into position to document and report on something that would change human understanding of our place in the universe. But as we stood there in that impossible clearing, surrounded by beings whose origins and intentions we couldn't begin to fathom, I understood that documentation and reporting might be the least of our concerns. The energy sphere pulsed brighter. The symbols on the walls began moving faster, and the figures in the trees started walking toward us with purpose that suggested our observation period was over. The moment those beings stepped out from the tree line, everything changed. Stevens raised his weapon instinctively, but before any of us could react, the rifle simply stopped working. Not jammed, not broken, just inactive, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off its mechanical function. Williams tried his sidearm with the same result. Thompson reached for his medical kit and found that even his basic equipment had become inert. I've been in firefights where the enemy had technological advantages. I've faced opponents with better weapons, superior numbers, overwhelming firepower, but I'd never encountered anything that could simply neutralize our equipment without visible effort or apparent technology. These beings weren't carrying weapons that we could identify. They weren't operating devices or machinery. They just approached, and our military hardware became useless. The closest one stopped about 10 feet from our position. Up close, the differences became more pronounced and more disturbing. The skin had a translucent quality, almost luminescent, with what appeared to be circulatory systems visible beneath the surface. The eyes were larger than human proportions should allow, solid black with no visible pupils, but somehow conveying intelligence and emotion that felt completely familiar. When it spoke, the sound didn't come from its mouth. The communication formed directly inside our heads, bypassing our ears entirely. Not words in any language we recognized, but concepts and emotions that transferred meaning without linguistic barriers. The sensation was like remembering something you'd forgotten, information appearing in your consciousness as if it had always been there. The message was simple and terrifying. We were not the first humans they'd encountered. Our governments had been in contact for decades, maintaining secret agreements that kept their presence hidden while allowing limited cooperation on technological development. The craft we'd found wasn't crashed. It was a meeting point, a prearranged location where information and materials were exchanged between human representatives and this non-human intelligence. Rodriguez dropped his equipment pack and sat down hard on the ground. The implications were overwhelming. Everything we'd been told about our mission was a lie, but not in the way we'd suspected. We weren't witnesses to first contact. We were participants in an ongoing relationship that had shaped human technological advancement for longer than any of us had been alive. The being continued its telepathic communication, showing us images that appeared directly in our minds. Military installations we recognized, research facilities we'd heard rumors about, underground complexes that officially didn't exist, all of them connected to this ongoing cooperation between human leadership and beings whose origins remained unclear. Thompson asked the question that was burning in all our minds. Why were we here? Why had they chosen a SEAL team for this particular mission? The response came with emotional undertones that suggested something approaching regret. The agreement was breaking down. Factions within both human and non-human populations were pushing for disclosure, for an end to the secrecy that had defined the relationship. Williams wanted to know who in our government was aware of this arrangement. The answer came as a flood of images showing faces we recognized from news broadcasts and political coverage. Senators, cabinet members, military leaders, intelligence officials. The scope of knowledge was broader than we'd imagined, extending across multiple administrations and political parties. But there was something else, something darker underlying the communication. The beings showed us images of other teams like ours, special operations personnel who'd been brought to similar sites around the world. Some had returned to their units with modified memories, their experiences edited to match official cover stories. Others had chosen to join the cooperation program permanently, disappearing from their former lives to work within the hidden infrastructure maintaining the secret. Stevens asked what happened to those who refused both options. The silence that followed was answer enough. Teams that couldn't be trusted to maintain operational security, individuals who posed risks to the secrecy agreement, simply vanished. Not killed, the being clarified, but removed to locations where they could live comfortably while remaining completely isolated from the outside world. I realized we were being offered the same choice: cooperation, memory modification, or permanent isolation. There was no fourth option that included returning to our normal lives with our knowledge intact. The mission briefing had been accurate in one respect. We were never supposed to officially exist in this place, but not because of enemy territory or hostile governments, because what we discovered was too sensitive for normal military channels. Rodriguez was shaking. Whether from fear or rage, I couldn't tell. He dedicated his career to defending American interests, and now he was learning that those interests included cooperation with non-human entities whose agenda remained unclear. The being sensed his distress and provided additional context that somehow made everything worse. The technological advances that had defined the past 70 years of human development weren't entirely human achievements. Integrated circuits, satellite communications, advanced metallurgy, even basic computer architecture had been guided by information provided through this secret cooperation. Humanity's rapid technological progress was real, but it wasn't independent. Thompson demanded to know why. What did these beings gain from helping human technological development? The response came with emotional complexity that suggested the question touched on fundamental aspects of their civilization that we couldn't fully comprehend. They were explorers, researchers, anthropologists studying the development of younger civilizations. Earth was one of many worlds where they maintained observation posts, providing limited guidance to species showing potential for eventual inclusion in their broader community. But they were also refugees, survivors of some cosmic catastrophe that had destroyed their original homeworld. The cooperation with human governments served multiple purposes. It advanced human technology toward levels that would eventually allow for open contact and integration. It provided them with resources and facilities for their own research and survival needs. And it created a framework for gradual disclosure that would prevent the social and economic chaos that might result from sudden revelation of non-human intelligence. Williams asked the obvious question. If gradual disclosure was the goal, why the secrecy? Why not begin the process openly, with full democratic participation in the decision-making? The being's response carried undertones of something like pity for our naivety. Human governments weren't ready for open cooperation. The political, religious, and economic systems that defined human civilization were too fragile to survive the revelation that Earth was essentially a protectorate under alien guidance. The cooperation had to remain secret until human society evolved to the point where it could handle the truth without collapsing. But that evolution was taking longer than anticipated. Decades of gradual preparation had failed to create the stable, unified human civilization that open contact would require. Instead, political divisions were deepening, religious extremism was spreading, and economic inequality was creating social tensions that made disclosure increasingly dangerous. Stevens lowered his useless rifle and asked the question that had been building in my mind since the communication began. What was their timeline? How long before the secrecy ended, one way or another? The response came with urgency that suggested we were approaching a critical decision point. Other non-human civilizations were becoming aware of Earth and the cooperation agreement. Some were pressuring for immediate disclosure and the integration. Others wanted to end the cooperation entirely, arguing that humanity was too unstable and aggressive to join their broader community. The beings we were communicating with were caught between these factions, trying to maintain a middle path that was becoming increasingly difficult. Within the next decade, possibly sooner, the secrecy would end, either through planned disclosure managed by the cooperation agreement, or through forced revelation by outside pressure, or through complete termination of the relationship and humanity's return to isolated development. None of these options guaranteed positive outcomes for human civilization. The energy sphere inside the craft pulsed brighter, and suddenly we could see additional details of the interior. Banks of equipment that might have been computers or communication devices. Storage areas containing materials and objects that defied easy categorization. Living quarters designed for beings with different physical requirements than humans. Rodriguez pointed to one section that looked almost familiar. Human manufactured equipment, recognizable computer terminals and communication gear, integrated seamlessly with the alien technology. Proof that the cooperation was real, that human personnel had been working inside these facilities for years or decades. Thompson was studying the medical implications of what we were seeing. The beings showed no signs of breathing apparatus or environmental protection, suggesting they could survive in Earth's atmosphere indefinitely. But there were subtle differences in their physical structure that indicated they'd evolved under different gravitational and atmospheric conditions. The telepathic communication continued, providing technical details that none of us were qualified to fully understand. The craft wasn't propelled by conventional engines. It manipulated gravitational fields and spatial geometry in ways that allowed for movement that appeared to violate the laws of physics. The energy source was something beyond nuclear fusion, tapping into quantum mechanical processes that human science was only beginning to theorize. Williams asked about defensive capabilities. Could these crafts be detected or intercepted by human military systems? The response was unsettling. Human radar and missile systems were designed using principles that had been provided through the cooperation agreement. The non-human technology included built-in countermeasures that rendered human weapons ineffective against their craft. That was 3 years ago, and I've carried this knowledge like a poison in my blood ever since. They let us live, modified our memories just enough to function in normal society, but not enough to forget completely. Every night I wake up seeing those black eyes, feeling that telepathic touch, knowing that everything we think we understand about human progress is built on cooperation with beings whose true agenda remains hidden. The government classified our debriefing at levels beyond top secret. Our team was disbanded, scattered to different assignments where we'd never serve together again. Stevens transferred to a desk job and drinks too much. Thompson left the military entirely and won't return my calls. Rodriguez disappeared 6 months after our return, officially transferred to another program. But I know better. I'm telling you this because the timeline they gave us is accelerating. The strange phenomena people are reporting worldwide, the unexplained atmospheric disturbances, the increasing number of military encounters with unidentified craft. These aren't random events. They're signs that the cooperation agreement is breaking down, that the secrecy is becoming impossible to maintain. When disclosure comes, and it's coming whether we're ready or not, remember that it won't be first contact. It'll be the revelation of a relationship that's shaped human civilization for decades. The question isn't whether we're alone in the universe. The question is whether we'll survive learning that we never were. I've shared everything I can without triggering the protocols they implanted in my memory. If you want the complete truth, start asking why our most advanced technology always seems to leap forward in ways that surprise even our own scientists. Start questioning why certain military programs receive unlimited black budget funding with no oversight. Start demanding answers about what your government has been hiding in those underground facilities that don't appear on any official maps. The beings in that Venezuelan jungle told us that humanity stands at a crossroads. We can continue developing under their guidance toward eventual integration with their galactic community. We can choose independent development and face whatever cosmic challenges await us alone. Or we can be deemed too dangerous and unstable for continued cooperation. That choice may have already been made for us, but you deserve to know it's coming before the world changes forever. Because when the ships start appearing in daylight over major cities, when the governments can no longer deny what they've hidden, when the religious and economic systems that define our civilization begin collapsing under the weight of revealed truth, remember that some of us tried to warn you. My name is Jake Morrison. I served my country for 12 years, and I've told you everything I'm able to tell you. What you do with this information is up to you. But whatever happens next, at least you'll understand that the change was always inevitable. We just thought we had more time to prepare.